Hey gang, thanks for tuning in. I'm doing this very, very special report on these late allegations, these crazy allegations against Vince McMahon. But I wanted to give you a heads up before we get started. There are some pretty crazy things in this story that unfortunately we have to go into some detail on. So please use discretion. Let's get started. This is the fall of Vince McMahon. All right, welcome back to part 11 of the fall of Vince McMahon. This part is called Mrs. McMahon and the NDA. This covers a huge, wide swath of time from winter 2022 to effectively the present, let's say January of 2024. If you've been with us until now, thank you very much. It has been 10 dirty, dangerous, disgusting, deplorable episodes. But I think it's very important when you look at the big picture to have a clear understanding of where we're going and why we're going there. And this is where everything kind of comes together. So this will be the last chapter in the actual story, and then we'll talk about the actual ask, the actual claims, right? So we've told this big, long story. What are the actual take-home messages? That's in the next episode. Part 12, and then part 13 is going to kind of be the fallout so far, let's say in the first 2 to 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed. If you remember, part 10 was called Grant Meets the Talent. We talked about a cleverly unnamed, but clearly a particular person, a WWE superstar / ex-UFC champion, that was brought into the story. Some very salacious claims were made. This is kind of where the sex trafficking claims come back up, because there's some talk about Vince paying this superstar to travel across state borders, specifically to have a sexual encounter with Grant. In addition, there's some illicit videos that Grant takes and then shares with the talent. That's kind of where we are now. So then the real question becomes, we've finally reached this crescendo in the story. Everything is as loud, everything is seemingly as deplorable, as chaotic as it possibly can be. So what happens? How does everything come crashing down? That's what we're going to talk about this time on part 11. So let's get into it. In January of 2022, Vince abruptly begins separating himself from Grant, basically saying that he cannot be alone with her or speak to her at all. So he immediately becomes very distant, and there really is no clear indication to Grant, at first at least, why this is happening. On January 9th, she meets with Vince once again at his condo, and basically, Vince tells her that his wife, Linda, has become aware of their illicit affair, and basically that his life is falling apart. He's going to lose his condo, that Linda's going to divorce him. As a result of that divorce, he could very easily lose the company. He kind of dumps it all on her all at once. But she has a chance to swoop in and essentially become the hero. Vince tells her that if she signs an NDA, then there would be no public divorce with Linda, and that would not only keep the company intact, but it would also keep Grant's, should we say, reputation, or at least public perception reputation, intact as well. It would allow Vince to keep his condo. It would preserve his controlling interest in WWE. Basically, she has an opportunity to swoop in, Deus Ex Machina style, at the last second and save Vince, save the company, save herself, save Vince's marriage. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird and maybe a little bit ironic at this moment where she is at her weakest. I mean, let's just think about this. The way that the lawsuit paints this, she has been defecated on. She has been, according to the lawsuit, raped. She's become John Laurinaitis' sexual plaything. She has she's literally become objectified. She is literally an object of Vince's wills. She's taken God only knows how many sexually explicit photographs and videos. She's become a plaything of the talent. She really could not get any lower than she is right now. And yet, in this moment of complete and total weakness, it would appear, at least the way the lawsuit frames it, Vince comes to her and basically says, you hold the future of WWE, you hold the future of me, you hold your own future in your hands right now. And with a simple swipe of the pen, you can return everything back to normal the way that it was before, almost as if none of this had ever happened. Or you could not do it and everything could come crashing down. You could basically trigger some kind of nuclear holocaust within WWE that could disrupt everything and perhaps end everybody's careers in a very public and bloody manner. So it's very interesting. Vince advises her not to return to the office, and that both Vince and an unnamed WWE employee, WWE CO1, will help her find other employment. He suggests that when she resigns, she use a health-related excuse, and following the talk, there is another sexual encounter between them. So, not a lot of lurid claims about rape or any specific abuse at this point. To me, my personal opinion, that lends some credibility to it. There's really no reason to include this if it isn't any kind of violent sexual encounter, except to be transparent. It certainly doesn't help her case that she was passively abused, that she's the straight victim if, while she basically holds the company in her hands, as she seems to right now, she chooses to enact another sexual encounter with him. So yeah, basically he comes to her, says, sign this NDA, everything will go back to the way that it was before for me. You can resign from the company. We'll help you find other employment. And that's basically going to be it. On 1/14, Grant receives the NDA, an NDA to-do list from Vince, which basically outlines the steps that she needs to take in order to effectuate the said NDA. In the original NDA, Grant and Vince negotiate basically on a $3 million payment to compensate her for her losses in exchange of her signing the NDA. The idea being that this is obviously going to be a major disruption in her career. If this potentially leaks out, she's probably going to have to take a job at much lower wage, significant sacrifices, both personal and, of course, professional, as a result of this. So they end up agreeing on $3 million, according to this lawsuit. As part of the agreement, WWE counsel insists on installment payments as they were experiencing cash flow issues. So even in the lawsuit itself, Grant kind of says, wait a minute, why does it matter if WWE is having cash flow issues? This is between me and Vince. The company doesn't have anything to do with this. The company is its own entity, it's its own corporation, it's its own, legally speaking, its own person. What does this have to do with any of it? And they kind of shrug it off, and they just say, hey, we're having cash flow issues. We need to work out an installment plan in order to handle this. 5 days later, on January 19th, Grant retains legal counsel on a referral from Vince's celebrity doctor. Not to be advised, don't take your corrupt sexual predator, apparently sexually predatory master's advice on who to go to, or at least the master's doctor's advice on who to go to. You can see how convoluted this gets, but I wouldn't choose legal counsel on the advice of the person that is supposedly abusing me. Okay, that would be a bad idea. On January 24th, 5 days after that, requests from Vince for explicit content for both himself and this WWE superstar continue. So again, keep in mind, this is all over, right? It's supposed to be done. He's said he's going to completely disconnect from her. He wants nothing to do with her. He can't have anything to do with her anymore. His life's falling apart. Here, sign this NDA, and yet supposedly the requests are still coming in for explicit material. All suggested NDA drafts. So Grant's attorney gets the NDA drafts, looks at it, and is like, heck no, I'm making changes, right? The idea is to start a negotiation. All of these changes, which includes a list of people with knowledge of Vince and Grant's relationship, are completely rejected by Vince's team. They just, I don't even know how closely they look at it, but the implication in the lawsuit is that they're like not even addressed at all. 2 days later, Vince begins really pressuring her to sign the NDA because he needs to report to the board of WWE, specifically the audit committee that was created by the board, that the issue is closed. And I can remember when this happened in January of 2022. I can remember that they said that they had to do an investigation and that they had to look into some claims that were being made. And it's pretty clear now, looking back on this lawsuit and thinking back to what was happening at the time, it was pretty clear that the board basically said to Vince, you need to clean up your mess, and you better have it cleaned by this date. Report back that the mess is picked up, that, all the loose ends have been tied up, as it were, and come back to us and let us know, and then we can close this topic and we can move on with our lives. The pressure becomes overwhelming from Vince, and basically she at one point becomes so overwhelmed that she says, I just want to be done with it. I just want to be done with it. I'm not going to sign this NDA. I'm just going to resign, and I promise, Scout's honor, I'm not going to say anything about it ever again. I just want to be done with this. But you are in way too deep at this point with Vince McMahon. You cannot just bow out at this point. No way, no how. And that is shot down immediately. She's literally in so deep at this point that she doesn't know how deep she is in, is clearly what's happened here. The next day, between 127 and 128, pressure continues to mount. The deadline to the board is moved up. Several open NDA issues are left on the table, totally unresolved. And on 128, under incredible mounting pressure to sign, Grant signs the less than optimal NDA, and frankly incomplete NDA as it was, which triggers all of the other stuff that I mentioned before. It triggers Vince being able to go back to the audit committee and say, all the loose ends are tied up, everything's covered, we're good to go. And I can remember at that time, it was like, okay, the storm has passed, we're moving on, everything's okay, we're good to go. On February 4th, Grant was wired her first $1 million installment. So I believe the NDA terms said $1 million a year for 3 years was the agreement that they came to. Every February, she'd get another $1 million. At the end of February, 2/28, Grant is wired an additional $10,000, which is designed to cover any attorney's fees associated with the NDA, which again was looped into the NDA. You're not just going to pay me, you're going to cover my attorney's fees as well. Back up slightly. 5 days after she receives the first $1 million installment, so this is February 9th, she formally notifies John Laurinaitis and WWE HR that she has decided that she's going to resign and she has an intent to leave. At one last meeting after the NDA signature, she is subjected to one last oral sex-related humiliation at Vince's condo. And after that, she never sees him again. That is the end of that. One last visit to the condo in February, and that is that. The description of that last meeting in Vince's condo is a particularly interesting one. The awkwardness really seeps off the page. You really get a you really get a clear picture of the oddness of the relationship between them and just the incredible amount of simultaneous comfort and discomfort that exists in the relationship. It's very odd, very unusual. Okay, fast forward again to March. So now we're into March of 2022. Vince calls Grant while she's in Florida on vacation. He tells her that they will not talk again, and that if she has anything to talk about, it needs to go through WWE corporate. They agree to resume contact after the next WrestleMania. Vince kind of says, I've been so busy, but I'd like to keep in contact. Nothing in the NDA saying that they can't do that. And basically, supposedly at this phone call, Vince tells her, hey, don't let my business with WrestleMania 39 hold you up at all. You keep sleeping with whoever you want to sleep with, including any superstars I may have introduced you to. 2 days later, this unnamed WWE superstar / UFC champion contacts Grant, and she sends him explicit pictures. So this is kind of odd. This is, again, the fact that this is being openly shared seems to add to the credibility of it to me. Assuming this is true, it really doesn't help her case at all. I mean, she's done. She's out. She's got the NDA. She's got the money. She has almost everything she could ever possibly get out of this, except for maybe some justice, which would be nice. But short of that, she's out of it. Like, she could just, leave Vince's texts on read, not pick up the phone call, leave the superstar's texts on read, not pick up the phone. And yet she still is doing this kind of stuff. And it makes you wonder, are they trying to get ahead of it? Are they trying to prevent a gotcha during the trial process? Is it the truth? What was her motivation for doing this after you're basically out? I mean, you're not even in the same state, right? You're in Florida now. It's March. So, but it's outlined in the lawsuit. At the end of March, 3:30, Grant's attorney learns from Vince's attorney that an anonymous email leaked the relationship between Grant, Vince, and Laurinaitis. So some sort of anonymous email got sent and leaked to the board. And then that is what triggered the board to set up the audit committee and essentially force Vince to clean up his act in order to retain control over WWE. Fast forward almost a whole nother year. So everything's quiet for a year, right? I mean, we know that things weren't very quiet at all, right? We know that there was a lot happening within WWE. There was a lot of resignations, and then Stephanie McMahon taking over, and then Stephanie McMahon resigning, and Triple H sort of creating more of a leadership role, and people coming and going. There was a lot going on, but in regards to this specific lawsuit, very little has occurred. So it's now February 2023. It's time for her to receive the second $1 million installment payment. And that payment does not come. Per the NDA terms, she should have had $1 million, and she didn't get it. In addition, McMahon also agreed to pay her medical bills. Not exactly sure how long that's supposed to last. And any tax liability associated with the $1 million payment, which he did not do. So now, again, she got the money in 2022. It's now 2023. Time to file her taxes. Obviously, she has this unbelievable tax burden for what the taxman can only perceive as some sort of windfall. She's going to owe a lot of taxes on that, and that's not forthcoming. The 2023 $1 million payment is not forthcoming. None of it's forthcoming. And on 1/27/2023, due to trauma related to her abuse, Grant loses her dream job of managing her building, the only decent job she could get without references. So, again, not clear. There's not a lot of detail. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs written about this whole step, but she had secured some kind of employment, but is unable to perform the job. The lawsuit claims it's because of trauma and abuse that she received with Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis and WWE in general. And so now she is reliant on this income, very, very reliant on this income, and of course it hasn't come in at all. So there you have it. That is essentially the whole story in 11 parts, at least the lawsuit. That's the whole story of the lawsuit in 11 parts going forward. Part 12 is coming up. It's our wrap-up review. I'm going to kind of bring everything together, and we're going to answer a couple of questions, right? The first question we're going to answer is, what are the gifts, right, that are associated? There's a very specific list of gifts by year that we're going to touch on, and you'll see how those gifts escalate as the conduct of Vince escalates. Very interesting pattern there. We'll say, what is she claiming exactly? So we've told this long story associated with her interactions and her relationship with Vince McMahon, but what is she actually claiming? What are the claims that she's actually making in here? And then finally, we're going to talk about what is she asking for, right? So there's what claims is she told this big long story, this 64-page story. What claims is she making associated with this story? And then what is she asking for in the lawsuit? So that's what we'll be looking at this time. If you have stayed with us for this long, thank you very much. Thanks for being along for this incredible story. I won't say that I've enjoyed it, but it's been extremely, extremely educational. Please stay tuned for part 12. Keep watching so we can keep wrestling with the business.